They say that betrayal doesn't strike like lightning, it seeps in like poison, unnoticed at first, until it's too late. And standing there in the hotel suite, cradling my 3-month-old daughter, I felt the venom finally hit my bloodstream. Noah's phone buzzed on the dresser. He was in the shower, humming some self-satisfied tune, as if today was just another day, as if he hadn't spent last night tangled with someone else. I wouldn't have checked, it wouldn't have dared, except the preview notification lit up the screen, and the words cut through me like a blade. Missing you already. Last night was incredible, Kate P. My breath turned to ice. The baby stirred in my arms, her tiny fist curling into the fabric of my dress, anchoring me when the world felt like it was tilting. My hands shook, but I reached for the phone anyway, swiping it open with a code he had never thought to change. Our wedding date. The irony tasted bitter. The messages were all there, hundreds of them. Pictures, plans, lies. A business trip in Chicago that was actually a 5-star getaway with his assistant. Late nights at the office that were really expensive dinners and hotel suites. Their little dream of breaking away from Patterson Industries to start their own company, using my father-in-law's connections, no less. I should have screamed, thrown the phone, buried my fists into the mirror until it shattered into something as broken as my trust. Instead, a quiet rage settled in me, deeper than the panic, stronger than the heartbreak. A slow, burning, calculated fury that left no room for tears. Because Noah wasn't just cheating on me. He was stealing, lying, planning a future without me, while keeping me distracted with lullabies and late-night feedings. The bastard thought I was too busy with our child to notice. My grip tightened on his phone as the shower turned off. Steam curled beneath the bathroom door, and a few moments later, he stepped out, towel slung low on his hips, looking at me with that easy, practiced smile. "Morning, babe." He pressed a kiss to my cheek, then one to Jamie's forehead. "You ready for today?" Big moment for the family. The family. I almost laughed. Almost. Noah was being honored with the Legacy Award at our annual Patterson family reunion, a grand celebration of loyalty, integrity, and commitment to family values. He had spent weeks preparing his speech, probably between rounds of screwing his assistant. I forced myself to breathe, to let the mask slip into place. Of course, everything's set. Good. He flashed his perfect smile before reaching for his phone. "Have you seen?" I handed it to him before he could finish, watching closely as his fingers brushed against mine, as his gaze flickered to the screen and his expression froze, just for a second. Then, like the skilled liar he was, he smoothed his features into something unreadable. "Thanks, babe." He didn't check his messages. Didn't dare. But I saw it. That fleeting moment of fear, of realization that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as untouchable as he thought. The seed was planted. He just didn't know it yet. The Patterson reunion was an affair of spectacle, lavish, elegant, filled with people who wore their last name like a badge of superiority. The conference room glittered with crystal chandeliers, soft jazz floating through the air, a facade of sophistication layered over the generations of ruthless ambition. Noah moved through it all with practiced ease, shaking hands, laughing at the right moments, basking in the glow of his family's admiration. I stood at his side, holding our daughter, smiling like the devoted wife, like the fool he had mistaken me for. Patricia, my mother-in-law, beamed at me, unaware of the war brewing beneath my skin. "Everything ready for Noah's speech, dear?" I adjusted Jamie's blanket, nodding. "Almost. Just need to check the technical setup one last time." She patted my hand, oblivious. "You're such a blessing to this family. If only she knew." I turned toward the AV system, heart pounding not from fear, but from the thrill of inevitability. Because Noah wasn't the only one who knew how to play the game. And he sure as hell wasn't ready for what was coming. I used to believe that betrayal shattered like glass sudden, violent, leaving behind sharp edges that cut deep. But I was wrong. It doesn't shatter, it seeps, like water through cracks, spreading, eroding, poisoning everything it touches, until one day you realize you're standing in the wreckage of something that was supposed to be unbreakable. And I was drowning in it. The applause was thunderous, echoing through the grand ballroom as Noah took the stage, standing beneath the golden chandelier like a king addressing his kingdom. Our family. His legacy. The perfect man in a perfect life. My fingers curled around the edge of the table, knuckles whitening. My wedding band glinted under the warm lights, mocking me. The ring of a loyal wife. A devoted mother. A woman who had given him everything while he was busy giving himself to someone else. He adjusted his tie, the same one I had picked out for him, and smiled that practiced, charming grin that made women swoon, investors nod, and fools believe. I had been one of those fools. Family, he began, voice strong, confident. It's the foundation of everything we build, everything we stand for. Integrity, loyalty, honor, these aren't just words. They are values. They are. His phone buzzed in my hand. Kate P. The nerve. The sheer, unbelievable audacity. I had stolen his phone before he went on stage. A simple, casual lift from his pocket under the pretense of checking the slides. He hadn't noticed, too wrapped up in the fantasy of his own brilliance. I lowered my gaze, thumb hovering over the screen. Kate P. Can't wait for our morning check-in. Handsome. I have a surprise for you. A surprise. I wanted to laugh, wanted to scream, wanted to stand up in the middle of that ballroom and throw the damn phone at his smug, lying face. But no, that would be too easy. Instead, I inhaled slowly, forcing the fury down into something sharper, colder. Something I could wield like a blade. 5 minutes. That's how long until I turned his entire world inside out. You're always better with the technical stuff, babe. Noah had said it so casually, handing me his phone without a second thought. As if I was still that same trusting wife who made his life easier, who smoothed out the wrinkles so he could shine. He didn't know I had spent the last 24 hours unraveling his lies, dissecting every text, every call, every digital footprint. Didn't know that I had found everything. Hundreds of messages, pictures, plans for a business trip to the Bahamas next month. Without me. But it was more than just sex. They were planning to leave Patterson Industries, to steal clients, to build something of their own using the trust, the resources, the legacy that Noah's father had spent decades creating. And they had laughed about it, laughed at me. She's too busy with the baby to notice anything Noah's words. Written out, clear as day. I had stared at that message for so long the words burned into my mind, the betrayal tightening around my ribs like a vice. But there's one thing they had underestimated about me. I notice everything. The ballroom lights dimmed. A hush settled over the crowd as the presentation slide flickered onto the massive screen behind Noah. I tapped the AV technician on the shoulder. One last adjustment, I whispered, flashing the practiced smile I had worn for years. He nodded, stepping aside. The system was already set up to receive incoming video calls. Kate always called at 10. Am. Right on schedule. Noah continued, oblivious, his voice rich with false sincerity. A family's strength lies in its loyalty, in the trust that binds us together. My stomach twisted at the hypocrisy, but I kept my face impassive. I glanced at the AV panel. The small indicator light turned green. Incoming call. And then, Kate's face filled the massive screen behind him, larger than life. She was grinning, blonde hair tousled, wearing a silk robe that barely covered her. Hey, handsome, she purred, oblivious to the hundreds of horrified faces staring at her. Missing you already. That quick meeting in your office this morning wasn't nearly enough. Noah froze. His mouth hung open for a fraction of a second before he spun around, finally seeing what everyone else was seeing. The silence was deafening. Kate giggled, adjusting the camera. I thought we could go over our plans to break away from your father's company. I turned my head just in time to see Robert Patterson, Noah's father, slowly rise from his seat. His face was carved from stone, his fury barely leashed. Kate continued, oblivious. I've already reached out to some of Patterson Industries' top clients. They're very interested in what we have to offer. Patricia, my mother-in-law, let out a choked sob, clutching Jamie's blanket like it was the only thing keeping her together. Around us, whispers rose like a gathering storm. The fall of a golden boy. The destruction of a dynasty. Noah lurched forward, scrambling for the phone in my hands. Shannon, don't. I pulled back smoothly. standing as I met his gaze for the first time since this all began. I think Kate explained everything quite clearly, I said, my voice steady. Though I'm sure the board will have a few follow-up questions. The screen went black as Kate, realizing her mistake, disconnected. But the damage was already done. Noah's carefully constructed world had just crumbled into dust, and he had no one to blame but himself. I turned, gathering Jamie's things, my heart hammering in my chest as I spoke my final words to the man who had underestimated me. I'll have my lawyer contact you. I'm sure you understand I'll be seeking full custody. And with that, I walked out of the ballroom, leaving him to choke on the ruins of his own betrayal. The weight of the moment settled around me like the thick, oppressive air before a storm. The ballroom, just minutes ago filled with laughter and self-congratulatory speeches, now hung in stunned silence. Every single pair of eyes was on Noah. He stood frozen at the podium, his complexion ghostly pale, as if he were watching his entire life unravel before him. Which, of course, he was. I could almost hear the precise second his heart cracked in two. Behind him, the massive screen had gone dark, but the damage had already been done. The echoes of Kate's voice still lingered in the air, her giggles, her casual discussion about betraying this very family, her confidence in Noah's ability to steal from his own blood while sleeping beside me at night. The hypocrisy was suffocating. Robert Patterson, patriarch of the dynasty, the man who had built Patterson Industries from the ground up, stood slowly. The sound of his chair scraping against the polished floor was deafening. Noah. His voice was quiet, deadly. My office. Now. Noah swallowed hard, looking at me, pleading silently. I held his gaze, my expression impassive. I would not save him. I was never going to save him. A murmur spread through the crowd like wildfire. Phones were pulled out, hushed whispers turning into full-blown conversations. Scandal. That's what this was. A public execution of the golden boy. Patricia, my mother-in-law, clutched Jamie tighter, her hand over her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. I had no sympathy for her. She had raised this man, had shaped him, had turned a blind eye to his arrogance, his deceit. Noah took a step forward, stumbling slightly, the weight of his downfall pressing down on him. He turned towards me, his voice barely above a whisper. Shannon, please, please, please. This man who had orchestrated an entire double life behind my back, who had made a fool of me, who had called me, too distracted with the baby to notice, was now begging. I tilted my head, considering him for a moment. Then, with absolute clarity, I said the words that would seal his fate. I think Kate explained everything quite clearly. A sharp inhale from the crowd, a gasp from somewhere behind me. Noah flinched as if I had slapped him. His father let out a slow breath, rubbing a hand over his jaw before looking at me. Shannon. I met his gaze. Robert Patterson was many things a ruthless businessman, a man of tradition, a father who did not tolerate weakness. And right now, I was the strongest person in this room. Everything is set up for Noah's presentation, I said, my voice steady, unwavering. I just didn't realize the subject matter would be so revealing. He studied me for a long moment. Then, with an almost imperceptible nod, he turned back to his son. You've embarrassed this family. Noah opened his mouth, but no words came. There was no excuse, no saving himself from this. I had made sure of it. Robert's gaze shifted to me again, this time filled with something else. Recognition. Calculation. He knew. He knew I hadn't just stumbled onto this information. He knew this wasn't an accident. He knew I had planned every second of it. And, more than that, he respected it. Security, Robert said, his voice cold and authoritative. Escort my son out of this building. His access to the company is revoked immediately. A collective intake of breath. The whispers turned frantic. Noah whirled around. Dad, you can't. I can. Robert's tone was final, and I just did. Two men in dark suits appeared, moving towards the stage. Panic flickered across Noah's face. He turned back to me, stepping forward like he might reach for my arm, like he might still think I would be his salvation. I stepped back, his face twisted in desperation. Shannon, please. We can fix this. I smiled then. Not cruelly, not even mockingly, just knowing. You broke it! You fix it! And then I turned away. Behind me, I heard the scuffle, the frantic scrambling, the disbelief. I heard the end of Noah Patterson as he had known himself. And as I walked out of that ballroom, I knew with absolute certainty this was just the beginning. Noah's name was already being scrubbed from Patterson Industries before the dust had even settled. By the time I reached my hotel suite that night, my phone was a battlefield of missed calls, desperate texts, and frantic voicemails. Noah, Shannon, please. I need to explain. Noah, Dad overreacted. This isn't the end. Noah, please pick up. Don't do this. Don't do this? As if I had been the one to cheat. I had been the one to betray. I had been the one to risk our daughter's future on some fantasy with a second-rate mistress. I let the phone ring until the sound became nothing more than background noise, a pathetic symphony to his downfall. Jamie stirred in her crib, and I turned away from the chaos, pressing a hand to her tiny chest, feeling the steady rhythm of her breathing. She was the only thing that mattered now, not Noah, not his pathetic pleas, not the empire he had just watched slip through his fingers. The morning headlines were ruthless. Patterson Industries heir caught in scandal, betrayal, infidelity, and corporate espionage exposed. Legacy in tatters. Noah Patterson stripped of power, facing board investigation. Family first fraud? Patterson Industries undergoes major shakeup after SONS disgrace. I sipped my coffee, scrolling through the articles with detached amusement. Each piece painted Noah as the traitor, the man who had almost burned his own inheritance to the ground over a woman who, by now, had surely gone into hiding. I checked his messages again. Kate had stopped responding. Typical. No honor among thieves, after all. Noah showed up at my hotel that afternoon, disheveled, desperate. The man who had once stood before crowds, sleek and confident, now looked like a ghost of himself, suit wrinkled, tie missing. His usually perfect hair, a mess from where he'd clearly run his fingers through it 100 times. He pounded on my door, voice hoarse. Shannon, open the door. Jamie stirred again, and I sighed, placing my coffee down before crossing the room. I opened it just enough to see him, but not enough for him to step inside. He tried anyway. I caught the movement and blocked him with my arm. No, his face crumpled. Jesus, Shannon, I know I messed up. But I need to talk to you. Noah. I let his name settle between us, slow and deliberate, like I was considering his very existence. The last time we spoke, you were about to accept an award for family values while your mistress was waiting for her morning call. Forgive me if I don't find you particularly convincing right now. He flinched like I had slapped him. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. What is it that you want? Exactly? He exhaled sharply, raking a hand through his hair. I lost everything. I arched a brow. No, Noah. You threw everything away. He shook his head, taking a step back, and for the first time since this entire mess started, I saw it. The realization. The fear. Not just for his career, not just for his money, but for Jamie. I'll fight for custody, he said suddenly, voice raw. You think you can just take her from me? I tilted my head. And what exactly do you plan to argue in court, Noah? That you were too busy plotting corporate espionage and screwing your assistant to be a responsible father? His jaw clenched. I made a mistake. I laughed then. Actually laughed. A soft, bitter sound. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary, Noah. A mistake is leaving the stove on. You orchestrated an entire double life. You made your bed, now lie in it. His nostrils flared. I'm still her father, and I'm still your wife. I shot back. For now. His expression faltered. I smiled then, not with warmth, not with kindness. With finality, I already have a meeting with my lawyer. Full custody. His hands curled into fists. You can't just... I can. I stepped forward then, just enough to ensure he saw exactly who he had underestimated. And I will. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Because he knew. There was no coming back from this. By the end of the week, Noah's name was erased from Patterson Industries. His bank accounts were frozen. His corporate cards revoked. The company had bought out his shares for the minimum possible value, and he was under internal investigation for his attempted theft of company clients. His reputation? Destroyed. Kate? Gone. His family? Ashamed of him. And me? I was finally free. I signed the divorce papers 2 weeks later. Noah didn't fight. He knew better. The custody hearing lasted all of 20 minutes. The judge didn't even hesitate before ruling in my favor. Noah walked out of that courtroom with nothing. I walked out with Jamie in my arms, a new life ahead of us, and a quiet, unshakable victory. Noah Patterson had spent his entire life believing he was untouchable. He had never seen me coming. The first time I walked into Patterson Industries, as its new chief technology officer, the whispers followed me like shadows. Not as Noah's wife, not as the woman he humiliated, not as the collateral damage of his downfall. No, I was here as the woman who took everything from him. And they all knew it. It had been Robert's idea, though I had seen it coming the moment I walked out of that ballroom, leaving his son to choke on his own disgrace. "We need you," he had said, his voice firm, measured. "I need you." At first, I had laughed at the irony. The great Robert Patterson, the man who had once looked at me like a decorative piece on his son's arm, now needed me to clean up the mess his heir had left behind. I could have walked away. I could have taken my settlement, my custody win, and my freedom, and disappeared from the Patterson family entirely. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I wasn't just surviving, I was building. And when you build something new, sometimes you have to burn the ruins of the past to the ground first. Noah's office, my office now, was stripped of him. His nameplate had been removed, his personal items boxed up, waiting for him to claim them. I doubted he ever would. I sat behind the desk, running my fingers over the polished mahogany, taking in the space that had once been his kingdom. I could still feel his arrogance lingering in the air, like the aftertaste of something bitter. A soft knock at the door. I looked up to see Nicole, Noah's younger sister, hesitating in the doorway. She had been one of the only ones who hadn't made excuses for him. "You really took it," she said, stepping inside, crossing her arms. Dad wasn't bluffing. "No," I said simply, leaning back in my chair. "He wasn't." She exhaled, shaking her head. "I don't know if I should congratulate you or warn you." I tilted my head. "Warn me?" She sat down, watching me carefully. "Noah's not going to let this go, Shannon." I let out a soft laugh. "Let what go? His company? His money? His future?" I met her gaze, unwavering, because all of those things were his to lose. She didn't argue, because we both knew the truth. Noah had destroyed himself. I had only handed him the mirror so he could watch. The board meeting was packed. Investors, department heads, senior executives, all of them waiting to see if I would rise or fall. Noah had walked into these rooms with entitlement, wielding his last name like a weapon. I walked in with something far more dangerous: competence. I had spent years watching, learning, understanding what made this company thrive and what made it vulnerable. I had sat in on meetings where I was ignored, but I had listened. And now? Now they had no choice but to listen to me. Robert sat at the head of the table, expression unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, something close to approval. "Miss S. Kennedy," one of the board members started, using my maiden name now that my divorce was public. "There's concern that given the personal history of the situation, emotions may cloud judgment." I smiled. "Gentlemen, if I made my decisions based on emotions, I wouldn't be sitting here." "Noah would," a murmur rippled through the room. I continued, voice steady. "Patterson Industries is at a crossroads. We can either pretend this scandal never happened and attempt damage control, or we can evolve. We can modernize. We can move forward instead of looking back." The board members exchanged glances, some skeptical, some intrigued. I slid the folder across the table. "This is my 5-year plan for integrating AI-driven cybersecurity into our financial services division." Silence. Then, a voice from the end of the table. One of the older executives, the kind of man who had likely dismissed me as Noah's wife for years. "This would change everything," he murmured, flipping through the proposal. I met Robert's gaze. He nodded once. Motion carried. Unanimous. The headlines shifted within weeks. Peterson Industries rebounds under new CTO innovation in the face of scandal. Shannon Kennedy, the woman who took down Noah Patterson, now leads his family's empire. Revenge or redemption? The former wife of Patterson Industries' disgraced heir proves her worth. Noah's name was now nothing more than an afterthought in the business world. But mine? Mine was just beginning. The first time I saw him again, it wasn't in a courtroom or a boardroom. It was in the lobby of Patterson Tower. He was standing at the front desk, arguing with security, his voice strained, his suit wrinkled. A man who had once walked through these halls as if he owned them, now begging for access. I stepped off the elevator, heels clicking against the marble. He turned at the sound, and for the first time in months, our eyes met. No words were exchanged. There was nothing left to say. I didn't stop walking. Security escorted him out moments later. 1 year after Noah's downfall, I stood on stage at a global fintech conference, presenting Patterson Industries' latest advancements in cybersecurity. The audience was captivated. Investors lined up after the talk. The company's stock soared. I had rebuilt the empire Noah had nearly destroyed, and I had done it better than he ever could. As I stepped off the stage, my assistant approached, handing me my phone. A message from your lawyer. I read the text. Noah's final appeal for joint custody had been denied. I exhaled slowly, looking down at the screen, at the name of the man who had once thought I was nothing more than an accessory to his success. Then I deleted the message. There was work to do. The future wasn't going to build itself. Noah was arrested on a Wednesday morning. I was in a meeting with Patterson Industries' top cybersecurity engineers when the news broke. My assistant, Evelyn, slipped into the conference room, whispering something into Robert's ear. His expression remained unreadable, but the slight flicker in his eyes told me everything. It was time. I excused myself, stepping out into the hallway just as Evelyn handed me her tablet. The live news feed was already running. Former Patterson executive, Noah Patterson taken into custody, corporate espionage, and fraud allegations mounting. The footage played in a loop, Noah being led out of his downtown apartment building in handcuffs, his face pale and drawn, his once pristine suits replaced by wrinkled business casual, his usual smug confidence completely erased. A swarm of reporters shouted questions as he kept his head down, his lips pressed into a thin, unsteady line. I let out a slow breath, feeling the weight of it settle over me. This wasn't satisfaction. It was inevitability. The charges had been building for months. After Noah's scandal at the family reunion, the board had launched a full investigation into his misconduct. What had started as a betrayal of me had snowballed into something much bigger. Emails leaked. Documents surfaced. Clients came forward. Noah hadn't just been planning to steal Patterson Industries' contacts. He had been actively funneling sensitive corporate data to third-party investors, setting the foundation for his own competing firm. He had leveraged company resources, stolen proprietary technology, and engaged in what could only be described as deliberate financial sabotage. The SEC had been investigating him quietly. The moment they had enough to act, they did. And now, he was paying the price. The courtroom was filled with reporters when I arrived. I sat near the front, my posture relaxed, my expression unreadable. I wasn't here for Noah. I was here to witness the end of an era. He was escorted inside minutes later, his hands cuffed in front of him. He had lost weight. His once expensive legal team had dwindled, the best attorneys distancing themselves as the evidence stacked higher and higher. Noah looked around, his gaze scanning the room until it landed on me. His face twisted somewhere between resentment and desperation. He wanted me to look away, to show weakness, to break. I didn't. Instead, I leaned forward, resting my arms on my knees, and smiled. Just a little, just enough. His lawyer mumbled something in his ear. Noah clenched his jaw and faced forward. The judge entered. The trial began. Noah's lawyer tried to argue incompetence, that Noah hadn't acted with full intent, that he had been manipulated by outside forces, coerced by his former assistant Kate Parker, who had conveniently disappeared from the country days before her own arrest warrant was issued. It was pathetic. The prosecution tore them apart, methodically, ruthlessly. just as Noah had once done to so many others. The stolen contracts, the financial irregularities, the emails detailing his plans, written in his own words. Each piece of evidence was another nail in his coffin. And then came the testimony. Patterson Industries' top executive spoke of his deception. Former employees described his unethical tactics, how he had used his father's influence as a shield. His own sister, Nicole, took the stand, her voice steady as she testified that Noah had once bragged about his backup plan. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they returned, the verdict was swift. Guilty. On all counts, the sentence was harsher than expected. 8 years in federal prison. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Noah's face drained of color. He had never truly believed this would happen to him. But I had. The gavel slammed down. The courtroom erupted into a frenzy of flashing cameras and frantic notes scribbled by reporters. And I? I simply stood, adjusting my blazer, stepping past him without a word as he was led away. No parting glance, no final words, nothing. Noah Patterson had once built his world on control. Now he had none. Outside, Robert was waiting. He wasn't a man prone to sentiment. But as I approached, he nodded once. It's over. I shook my head. Not for me. He exhaled, studying me. So what's next? I looked out at the flashing lights, the crowds speculating about the fall of a dynasty, the reporters already pivoting to the future of Patterson Industries. What was next? Everything. Because Noah's destruction had never been the end game. It had been the beginning of something much, much bigger. I turned back to Robert, my voice calm, certain. Now we build. 1 year after Noah's sentencing, I stood in front of a floor-to-ceiling window in my new office, looking out over the skyline of a city that had once felt like his domain. Not anymore. The office was mine now. Everything was. Patterson Industries had thrived under my leadership, expanding into cybersecurity, AI-driven finance solutions, and global markets that Noah never had the vision to reach. For the first time in decades, the company wasn't being run on legacy and entitlement. It was being built on merit. A knock at the door. Evelyn stepped inside, a knowing smile on her face as she set a file down on my desk. The final paperwork from the board. Your official promotion to CEO. I let the words sink in, the weight of them pressing against my ribs, filling spaces I hadn't realized were empty. CEO. Not because of my last name, not because of marriage, because I earned it. I glanced down at the file, running my fingers over the embossed Patterson Industries logo before signing my name on the final page. Not Kennedy, not Patterson, just Shannon. No more attachments to the past, only what I had built for myself. I visited Noah for the first and last time that afternoon. It wasn't for closure. I didn't need that. It was for clarity. The prison's visitation room was sterile, cold, the opposite of the luxury Noah had once bathed in. When they brought him in, I barely recognized him. Gone was the arrogance, the tailored suits, the easy confidence that had once made him untouchable. He looked older, diminished. He sat down across from me, shackled, staring at me like he was trying to figure out who I had become. I met his gaze, unflinching. What do you want? He finally muttered. I tilted my head, studying him. You once told me I was too busy with the baby to notice anything. His jaw tightened. Shannon, I noticed. I let the silence stretch between us, watched him shift uncomfortably in his seat. He hated this. He hated not having the power. He hated knowing I had won. I leaned forward, lowering my voice. You built your life on control, Noah. On power. On taking things that were never truly yours. I let my next words sink into him, sharp as glass. How does it feel to have nothing? His fingers curled into fists. Good. I stood, smoothing the fabric of my coat, my movements deliberate, powerful. I came here to see if there was anything left of the man I once knew. I paused, watching him struggle for words. There isn't. I turned to leave, and this time, when he called my name, I didn't look back. That night, I tucked Jamie into bed, running my fingers through her soft curls as she slept. She would never know the world I had walked through to get here. She would never know the weight of betrayal, the sting of humiliation, the slow, methodical art of taking back everything that was stolen. She would only know strength, integrity, power, earned, never inherited. I pressed a kiss to her forehead before stepping out onto the balcony, letting the cool air wrap around me as I stared out over the city. Noah was nothing more than a ghost now, a whisper of what could have been. But me? I was just getting started.